Okay, so I have my curve now, and remember I can use my curve either direction. I can flip it over, and I want to think about it as though I've got a right angle here that I'm joining with the right angle over here. And because this looks a little flat, if I want to, I can drop that down a line width. So I'm blending this right angle into that right angle and rotating it around until I'm happy with that curve. So there's one curve. And then on the other side, since I lowered the line, I need to come in at that same level. So I'm blending from this right angle into that one. So I'm going to trim this section out together. And if you want to go to the how to drape a basic pattern video and make a pattern from it, the traditional 4 basic pieces, front and back skirt, front and back bodice, that will correspond with what I just did there. Okay, while it's taped together, I'm going to trim it off. Keeping in mind that truing and balancing is connecting right angles with smooth curves. I have a right angle on this corner, and you can see that when I line the ruler up with it. It isn't as much of a right angle right there, but it's a smooth curve between. Right here I have a right angle with a smooth curve between, another smooth curve, and my center, front, back, and side seams are all right angles. Anything that I'm doing here works just the same full scale. It's just easier to get it all in the picture in half scale. So now that I've got my nice smooth curve and my right angles, I can separate them. And someone always asks why the front skirt is wider than the back skirt. And that just depends on the form you're fitting or the person you're fitting, and it will change from person to person. So just get used to that it's not always going to be the same thing. Typically, the back skirt is bigger than the front skirt because it has to fit over your gluteus maximus. But it comes down to whether or not where your armhole placement is, and the side seam has to come down at a 90-degree angle straight below the center of your armpit. So apparently this little dress form has an armhole that's a little bit backward. But it could be either direction, but the balancing process is the same either way. So I've still got everything lined up the way I wanted to, and if I want to lengthen my basic pattern, my sloper pattern, I could just extend them both straight down and keep them at a right angle, but I'm going to leave them this size because it's easier to fit them on a piece of paper and easier for you to see on the screen. So now I'm going to get 2 more pieces of paper out and trace them on because we're going to make a flared skirt pattern by closing all of the darting into the skirt. So instead of having the dart up here at the top, we're going to move the dart to the bottom, and we won't sew it as a dart, but it will be flare. And I usually like to just line this up on the edge of the paper so I have one less line to cut. And I never aspired to making YouTube videos. It's working out okay. Makes me nervous. Makes me self-conscious of this crazy bruise I have on my arm. No one's beating me. I just went outside and opened the electrical panel and it slammed on my arm. So it was just an accident and it'll go away in another week or two. And I can see right here where I slipped with the scissors. Oh, and you can't see that. It's not all on the screen, is it? So I'm just going to make sure I bring that down the rest of the way. Okay, so I have the whole thing traced on. This is dress form number 58. Sloper. Front skirt. If I were sewing it together as a straight skirt, I would cut one on the fold, and I'm going to put size 8. And this is the center front, and I'm going to put the fold symbol on it, but since it's a sloper, it could become whatever we want it to be. And if you'll be sure and put your names up there, even if it gets mixed up, I will know whose it is. Okay, one more thing before I move on. I want to make sure that the center of this dart is parallel to the center front. So I'm lining up this side of the ruler and making sure that it's parallel. Then I'm going to draw that line and just double check. And it looks like, well, it might just be where I drew the line, but it looks like I might be a tiny bit off right there. So the center of the dart has to be parallel to the center front, because when this dart is sewn together, you want to make sure that if you have a stripe or a plaid, that it comes together nicely. It's also more figure flattering. So if you happen to have, mine is 5/8 across the top. Oh, can't use the end of the ruler that's broken, can I? Okay, so I've got half. Actually, if I make it smaller right there, and it looks like I actually drew the line in the wrong place over here when I was tracing it, so I'm just going to erase that, and then everything is fine. So that's my line, and my dart is equal on both sides. And you can hear my little dog Ginger running around on the floor. She can't make up her mind where she wants to sit, and I enjoy her company, but sometimes she can be a bit of a nuisance. Alright, I'm tracing off my back skirt. And when you're seeing me trace, I'm going to let it run for now. Oh, that was my other little dog, Coco. And I think they've finally both found a place to sit. Anyway, when you can see me tracing, if you want to just fast forward, you can. I may put it on a faster speed. Depends on whether I say something. But I figure if you're following along, then it might take you this long too. Alright, there's the back skirt. I'm going to write down that it's number 58. If you end up draping one for something for a different one, you can put the number that you're using on it, and then you'll know that that's the form that it fits. How did I do the other one? 58 sloper, back skirt, center back, and I'll put the fold symbol on, but know that if you're not having a fold there, you'll need to add seam allowance. If you need it. And I'll double check this line. This one will be easier because it's not off the page. And that one looks like it's parallel to the center back. And that one looks like it's okay too. All right. We just made room for Ginny on the other side. So maybe she'll just curl up and take a nap. These are my originals. And I guess I didn't need to label that sloper because it's going to be our flared skirt. So to make a flared skirt, we're just going to add the amount of flare that's basic, that is required for this to fit. So this is where the dart will have been. It's going to open up down here when we close it. And when you close the dart, you can't get rid of this space and close the dart and just have it curve, because if you do that, it won't fit correctly. This is the minimum that's going to be required to fit. So I'm going to write down here minimum flare. Yeah, which flare is it? AIR or ARE? Minimum required fit. Minimum flare is the amount required for fitting. If you want to, you can add more later, but the first one we're going to do is just for required fit. If you want to, you can add seam allowance to it, but well, I'm going to leave a little bit extra on. I might end up cutting it off later. So I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler and draw a parallel line the rest of the way down through that dart so that it comes to the bottom, and I'll do this on the front and the back too. And we really need to do the front and the back with this one so you can really understand truing and balancing. So we're just going to do them both at the same time. I'm saving this for mending my paper back in, just like we do when we're doing bodice darts. And I'm going to cut up from the bottom to the very end of the dart. And if it helps, if I draw a little circle at that dart point and I don't cut through that from either direction, it keeps the page from falling apart. So I'm cutting up to the edge of that circle, and you can cut down either dart leg to the edge of the circle, and then when the paper is moving freely, if it doesn't move freely, you haven't cut quite deeply enough. And I'll go ahead and put glue on the side that is still there. And then close it. And that leaves me with this open space right here. And I want to fill that open space in because because we're not going to sew this up like a dart. It's going to go back into being part of the pattern. So part of the fabric that we cut out anyway. So I'm going to turn it over and put glue on the back is what's usually easiest for me, because you want to keep it flat. So I started at one end and mashed it all the way to the other, and now I can use my curve and blend between those lines and put that back together. And because of the way I did it, I have a right angle here already and a right angle here already. So for the moment, that's working. So that's the preliminary of my front. I haven't cut it the rest of the way out yet because I will probably have some changes. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with the back. I'll draw that little circle. You don't have to draw a little circle. I'm just showing you my thought process. So I'm going to cut all the way up to the point and down to the point. And close that and glue it down. And mend in behind it. Because that is not a dart anymore. It's now part of the fabric and the flare. And my curve again. But I don't want to bump in my curve down there, so I'm actually going to blend it a little bit beyond. And then trim it off so I have a smooth curve. So it kind of has a funny shape. It's still curved. This is the minimum required to fit. I still have a right angle on the center front and the side, on the center front at the top, and at the top on the side seam. Those are still right angles. So I'm going to put, instead of sloper on both of these, I'm going to change that so that it says minimum flare. I used my sloper to make it, but that's not its label. So minimum fit flare. And yep, I spelled it different both times. One of them's going to be correct and the other one's not. Okay, so you don't look at skirts together in the front. This, move that up so you can see. When I line those up at the top identically, they're not going to match here because the shape of this curve is determined by the waist. And usually well, you never sew the front and the back together. Sometimes you make them the same if you're making a lot of gores. That's panels around the skirt. But usually you're going to look at them together side by side the way we created that matching. And I need more glue right here. This is where you usually tell me to slow down anyway. So if you need to push pause and catch up, now is a good time. All right, if I wanted to change this from minimum flare to maximum flare without changing the shape of the skirt, I would continue this out on a right angle. So I would look up here, line this up at the top where it's at a right angle, and I would continue this line down at a right angle, and it would change the outside edge, and I would add flare. But do you see how I'm using this curve exactly as it is, and then I'm just creating a line that's coming off of that original right angle and just extending it out the rest of the way? I'm going to do that on the other side too. And maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself right here. You don't have to do that yet. But this line is the minimum line, and this line is the maximum line. We'll get more into the maximum one in a minute. But this kind of looks odd. But this would be the least amount of flare you could have and still be able to fit it on the same body. And because the back is smaller, I'm going to go ahead and cut it on that line so that you can see it. There are easier ways to do it in the long run, but right now the important thing to me is for you to be able to see what's happening. So I'm going to trim my back side seam off, and I'm going to trim off the top of the waist so that it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm going back to that same thing that I did before. When I'm truing and balancing, I'm going to line them up on top of each other like this. And now that I've added flare, your front dart is shorter and usually narrower than your back. And your back dart is longer and usually has more space in it. And because of that difference, when you add flare at the bottom, it changes the angle of the outside edge of the skirt. And if you need to rewind that, you can. I'll probably repeat it in a minute in a different way. But I'm going to line this up with a pin right here. And if I put the pin in the corner, well, before I put the pin in, I'm going to mark where this line is over here. So I'm just going to put a little temporary line right there. When this is together in the corner, the way that it's supposed to be right here, I know that's backwards from the picture, but I have that little line there. Now is when I come back in and put my parallel line from the center front lined up with the edge of the line, just like we did before, except this time it's going to turn out a little bit differently because the change in the amount of darting changes the amount of flare between the front skirt and the back skirt. So even though they matched identically before, they're not going to now because a different amount was added because of the darting. So I'm going to put a pin right there, and then I'm going to rotate that out so it's on that parallel line. So you can see where I marked it before, it's still parallel. I'm lining this up with it being parallel, and it's lined up exactly on the corner. And while it's in this position, I'm going to pin it, and then you'll see what happened. So with this line being here, my new line where they match on the side seam is out here, and this is my new corner. So this is where the back skirt is. That's the back minimum. And here's the front minimum. And this is what you're seeing right here. If you've got the front skirt in one place and the back skirt in another, it's important that you divide the distance in half all the way up and change the angle. So if I measure the distance here, I'm going to be finding that's 3/8 plus a 16th, which is 3/16 plus a half. So I'm going to be finding the middle all the way up and dividing that in half. So my new skirt side seam is going to be where that dotted line is, so I'll change colors. So this is my new side seam, and instead of using either of the original lines, the front minimum or the back minimum, they're both going to be changed to where that red line, that red dotted line is. So we're not using this one or this one. That one's too small, that one's too big. We're using the one halfway between, and by doing that, the skirt will be balanced. Well, why is it important to do that? That's just extra work. But if you go to a store like Ann Taylor and you're standing and looking in the mirror, you'll see in the reflection the Ann Taylor skirt that I'm hoping is balanced is going to be hanging straight down the side seam. And other companies that may not care as much, their side seam might extend backward or forward a little bit. But typically, instead of having that line be backward or forward a little bit, because of what gravity and grain do when they get together, it's still going to force it, if it has very much flare, it's still going to hang straight, but one side or the other is going to kind of pool on the side and have a little bit of extra hanging down, and it won't look quite as nice. And maybe I'll sew one up so that you can see that. We know how I love to sew. Actually, when I'm doing it, I enjoy it. Apparently, it's the cutting out part that slows me down. Okay, so because we want it to hang nice and straight and not have a pool on one side, we balance the skirt. So I'm going to cut it off on that line. This one gets extra, and I will need to add this amount to the front so that they both share that common line. And I'm going to use my curve because it turns out nicer when you use your curve. And I need to set a good example. Always use your curve. It turns out better. Ginny. Okay, Ginny wants to say hello. And she's crawling around. So there's Ginny. And now she's going to want to sit on her sister because they are apparently a little cold. And I think they're all settled now. Ginger wants to go outside and play with my daughter because it's sunny. Okay, so I'm cutting that off. And I guess I'll go ahead and leave the line on so you can see it. But that one has had some added to it. And my back, apparently I'm either not using enough glue or this kind isn't working because they're coming off. Okay, so typically you don't just tape the one paper back onto the other side. I guess I could, and then I would have it there. What I usually do instead, make sure I have enough paper, and then I will just put the paper on the other side. So I'm going to glue that on. This is the easiest way. This way you end up getting everything identical. So in a work setting, I will usually make one side of a skirt, and then I will trace the side seam onto the other side of the skirt. So I'm lining it up so that it's parallel again, and I'm looking through the paper at it and moving it over. Oh, there's the problem. So I've got it back to parallel again, and you can see the amount that needs to be cut off. And that's a little bit of a mystery. What did I do there? I'm wondering if I picked up a different piece of paper. You know how I'm good at doing that. Haven't moved from this spot, and yet the edge is different. So that's my new edge because I added to the front and I cut off the back. And of course, on a video, I did something. So I probably will go ahead and keep this and just fill in and blend that back together. They usually end up to be the same length when you're through. But I'm hoping you understand the concept. And I will fix the hem. It's not uncommon to have to fix the hem when you put them back together. So I'm going to also glue some more onto the bottom. This feels so slow.